Is what I wish to be doing with, this one wild and precious life taking a safety razor to a sweater? No. Hi, hello, my name is Allie, and this is my channel where I talk about what I'm knitting, how it's going, and what it's costing me. I'm an independent graphic designer coming to you from just outside Toronto, and today we are going to be doing the usual knitting podcast updates with a finished object and a WIP. But first, I want to get into my thoughts for a new knit along, and one that I'm hoping that you might think about joining me on, particularly like it's a pretty light lift and very customizable to what you want to do. And today I'm drinking out of my candy corn mug to start reining in spooky season. It also really kind of matches me. This mug I just got from Indigo, which is basically the Canadian Barnes & Noble, and in it today I'm drinking my go-to Sloan Classic Earl Grey. As for what I'm wearing today, this is my Laura Delgard Intarsia sweater. This is a pattern that I got access to through a course on Domestika. I did not actually wish to take the course. It was just the only way to get the pattern, and I really love the pattern. Now, I do have to say that this is a pattern that now that I am aware of the problem of size inclusivity, this is not a pattern that would now meet the standards of one that I would pick, because unfortunately this one only goes up to a 57-inch finished garment size. And this is a garment that's intended to be worn with like a pretty significant amount of positive ease. So a garment that maxes out at 57 inches, not accounting for ease, is just not. Hi, Copper. He's itching himself. These days I'm just looking for patterns that accommodate higher numbers than that, but this wasn't something that was on my radar at the time that I picked this one. Now, if you've seen this sweater on my channel before and you're thinking that it maybe looks a little bit different than the last time you saw it, this brings us into the main thing that I want to talk about today, which is the idea of fix it fall. I am conceiving of this as sort of like a knit along, but instead of knitting something new, we're just gonna fix stuff. Because I don't know about you, but I have found that now I'm a couple years into knitting and some things are starting to need some attention for different reasons. You know, some sweaters are coming out of storage for the cold weather and they're just feeling nubbly, like they could use a bit of attention to get rid of some pilling. I have things like socks that have had holes worn into them because I've gotten such good use out of them. And then there are things where just with a little bit of retrospect, with a little bit of time passed, I'm able to look at it and be like, you know, I think I would really like this a lot better if I just changed this one little thing about it that actually wouldn't be a big deal to go fix. Now, of course, also if you're like me, with little things like this that are like ostensibly easy but just kind of fiddly, you might also have had the thought that you should do these fixes for a while and have not yet gotten around to them. So I was thinking, as a way to motivate me to get these things done, to keep me accountable, and maybe to help you get some of these things done also, maybe we can do them together. And maybe that's part of our fall knitting. We can do a fix it fall, we can pull out all these little things that we've been meaning to do for a while, and get them fixed and have them ready to go for the colder weather. Because I mean, summer knits are definitely a thing, but I feel like for a lot of us, cold weather knits are really like the bulk of our knitting wardrobe. So it's time to get these things fixed up so that they can help us out heading into the colder months. So this is gonna be a pretty like informal knit along. You know, I don't have like prizes or anything like that set up. This is it's just like a kick in the pants to all of us to get this done, hopefully together. So I'm calling it Fix It Fall. I'm thinking on Instagram and in YouTube comments, we can use hashtag #FixItFall KAL. And I would love for you to either show me or tell me what you would like to fix this fall. I would also love to see when your fixes are finished, before and afters. I think that could be really, really fun to look at. And if you're posting on Instagram, either to your grid or to your story, please do tag me at Allison Rowan, because I would love to share what everybody's working on. And we can kind of be in this together in our little Fix It Fall mode. So the whole idea of Fix It Fall has kind of come to me in like two disparate parts. There was sort of the origin of the idea and then the origin of when we're actually going to do it, because like I said, these are things that I have been putting off doing. And even once it occurred to me that a knit along might help me get them done, I then put off announcing the idea of the knit along. Because if I announced it, then I'd have to do it, and I wanted to put that off still some more. So initially, I was thinking about the idea of just sort of a fixing knit along, not necessarily tied to fall. But I was initially conceiving of this, I think, earlier this summer. So I was originally thinking, okay, well, if I can, convince myself to launch this plan soon, I was trying to come up with like a cute name, like something that would make a good hashtag. And, a really easy way to come up with a cutesy name is to make it an alliterative name, right? And so I was thinking, okay, fixing, fall, well, that goes together. It's currently summer, but what if it was like fix it for fall? Like what if the idea is that we're gonna be getting things out of storage to wear for fall soon, and wouldn't it be great if we had all these things ready to go like as soon as it became fall? And that would have been great if I could have convinced myself to do all these things a couple months ago. I didn't want to. However, I also think that fix it for fall is like a bit of a mouthful, so maybe it's for the best that we're here doing fix it fall instead. And the thing that kind of prompted me to actually get going on this is the fact that if you've seen my fall knitting plans, you will know that I signed myself up for a lot of cables, and I even called this out in the video. I was like, we'll see if I'm gonna come to regret this, if I'm gonna feel like this is too much of one thing. And it's not actually that I'm finding it too much of one thing yet. I mean, it's still very early days, but I am finding it's just not a thing that I can work on while really engaging with something else. So, you know, there are some shows that I feel like I can follow fine while I'm working on it, but then there are other shows where like if you miss 2 seconds, you've missed a lot. And I was just finding that my WIP is not compatible with that kind of thing. It's also not great for like knitting while just hanging out trying to carry on a conversation. I was also starting to make mistakes in it, which are really annoying to fix in cable patterns. So I was just feeling like, okay, like as much as I really prefer to focus on one project at a time, I don't think that that really works when I'm working on an elaborate cable pattern. So initially I was actually thinking, oh, I think I need to start like a new cast on. Like I need to find a project that's more stockinette focused that I can start and be working on alongside this. And I was sort of, you know, looking through what I have in my stash. I still have a lot of We Are Knitters Touch Me mohair left over from my No Frills cardigan that I made earlier this year. I was thinking, oh, like maybe this is the time to do kind of like a light mohair only sweater. And so, you know, I was pouring through Ravelry, looking at patterns, trying to look at how much yarn they require, how much do I have, what can I pull off? And I even came up with like a sort of plan. I was thinking of doing this pattern here that I'll pop in, sort of modifying it because it tells you to use 3 strands of a mohair and I would only be able to use 2 and have enough yardage, and even then probably not actually, but I think I would be okay with doing like a cropped version of it. You see like the mental gymnastics that I was doing to try to come up with something to do here, because I have already bought yarn for multiple projects coming up this fall. I don't like to have pre-bought yarn for a ton of things because I want to have the latitude to change my mind if that's not actually what I want to knit in what order. So I already feel like I have a lot, and I have just spent a lot of money on that yarn lately, right? So I'm like, I don't want to go buy another like sweater's quantity of something just to have something stockinette on the needles. So that's what prompted me to initially go stash diving, be thinking about this Touch Me mohair. But the reality is that there are so many things I want to knit this fall that do I really want to introduce some random other sweater just for the sake of having the type of thing to knit on? And if I really did need a more mindless knit and that was the only way that I could get it, like, yes, great, that would make sense. But then I realized I actually think that I have some other things that I've been avoiding that would fit that bill really well. And not immediately, because I think the nature with fixing things is that there's often sort of an upfront, you kind of have to like get it started, you have to do the setup. So a lot of fixing projects I think will have a higher sort of setup to mindless ratio than the project as a whole if you weren't just fixing something. But a lot of these things, if I just spent like 15-20 minutes getting them set up, it then gives me like at least a couple hours of something pretty mindless to work on. So if I could kind of be strategic about getting these fixes set up so that they're available to me when I do need that more mindless knit in between working on my cable project, I think that's gonna work really well. So my Laura Delgard sweater is actually the first thing that I decided to fix. And in this case, the fix is really just an aesthetic preference that I kind of clued into and then decided to change. So I'll pop up a picture of what this used to look like. And you can see that this neckband here used to be the same pink color as the center panel. And that's what the pattern shows. And I do think that in total isolation, like just as an object, as a sweater, I really, really loved how that looked. The problem is just that I'm like a pasty pale white lady, and this color is just kind of too like weird and fleshy against my skin, I think. And I just wasn't liking how it looked on me as much. Like I feel like it just kind of was doing weird things against my skin tone. And I just much prefer how the cinnamon color of this petite wool from We Are Knitters looks up against my face. And this is one that I have been planning for a while. Actually, I'm gonna pop up a mock-up that I made. And when I am putting in that mock-up, I will see what the saved date on that file is. So we will find out exactly how long I've been thinking I want to do this. But so I made that to confirm that this would actually make me like the sweater better, because I think it's one thing to have an idea and to think that it might work in theory, but it's very much another thing to actually see it with your eyes, being able to judge it that way. So if you're wondering about how I go about mocking up things, I actually have done a whole video about mocking up my knits. I will link that up here and in the description below. But yeah, I made this mock-up, I decided what I wanted to do, and then I did absolutely nothing with it for several months. Now, here we are. So to do this, because the way the sweater is constructed, you're knitting the sweater all in flat panels, and then once you've seamed it together at the end, then you pick up stitches around the neck to do this neckband. Now, at the time when I had to seam together a garment, that was terrible. I hated that. I'm not a big fan of seaming, and it was a pain in the butt. What it means is that it was incredibly easy to change out the neckband because it's the last step. If this were a raglan sweater where you start top down from the neckband, it would have been a much bigger undertaking to change out the neckband, and honestly, I probably wouldn't have done it. But because it was a pretty simple fix, it was perfect for Fix It Fall. So all I had to do was just like find where I had woven in the ends for the very last bit of the neckband, fish that out, and then I was able to just unravel it. And it just came right out. It was a separate piece of yarn that had been added on just to knit the neckband. and I just found my leftover cinnamon wool from this project. And I kind of, as I was unraveling, I didn't do the last row. I kind of left it in so that I still had that yarn guiding me where to pick up stitches. So I used a smaller needle than I was actually going to be reknitting the neckband on, just to have something little that could easily kind of fish in alongside that last row of the old neckband, just to be picking up the stitches from the body of the sweater, just to know exactly where that had been and how they'd been distributed. And then once I had that needle all the way in, pulled out the very last bit of the pink neckband, and then I was set up and ready to go knit the cinnamon version. And now obviously this is a very chunky knit. I was knitting the neckband on 8mm needles, so this flew by. Like, this whole process from start to finish was a one evening thing. Like, I think 3 hours in total, but in the time I was watching a show, I was hanging out, you know, like this wasn't like 3 hours of like focused, dedicated work. So it was very simple. I put it off for so long and it's finally done. But I like it so much better now. Like, I really feel like it just suits me a lot better. I'm a lot happier with it. And do I think that means I'm going to get a lot more wear out of it this year? Honestly, probably not, only because the amount that I wear this sweater I think is much less impacted by where the colors are placed and more just by the fact that this is such a warm sweater. Like, it's just so bulky. Like, I'm actually so hot sitting here filming right now. Like, it is very bulky wool. It's knit holding 2 strands of the petite wool together, which I think the petite wool is bulky, so it's a double bulky. It's pure wool. It's so hot. So there just aren't that many days in a year where I need to wear a sweater that hot, or where I even can wear a sweater that's that warm without like absolutely being drenched in sweat. But I do think that for all the times that I will wear it, I will love it even more. So I'm really excited about that. Also, as part of talking about what my knitting costs me, I also like on this channel, when I'm revisiting a past knit, to look at how much it's actually been worn relative to what it cost me to make in the first place, and what that means as far as its sort of use value in my wardrobe. And this is actually really easy for me to do because I'm a giant nerd and I use an app called Stylebook to track my wardrobe and what I wear every day. So I have data. So the sweater cost me $135 Canadian, and I've worn it 31 times in the last 2 years since I finished it, which puts our current cost per wear at $4.35 per wear, which is not bad. I mean, considering how hot this sweater is, like 31 wears over 2 years feels pretty good, because this is not an everyday sweater. This is not something I'm gonna wear once a week. So it's definitely gonna take a bit longer for that cost per wear to get down closer to a number I'd rather it be. I'd rather it be more like $2, ideally under $1, but to me that's like, in a garment's whole lifespan, I hope that it eventually hits under $1. You know, that's kind of the holy grail of like a piece that's really been worth its while. And considering that in the scheme of my knits, like I'm really hoping that most of these things are going to be pieces that are going to last me a lifetime. You know, like I'm purposely knitting these out of high quality materials. I know how they're made, so I would like to think that they're high quality at least. I mean, at least to the best of my ability, but probably better than some store-bought things, you know? So these are things that I'm hoping to last decades. So 2 years in the span of that is really nothing, and it has a lot of time to get closer to that $1 mark. So I feel good about how it's going so far. Now, the one other thing that I did on this sweater to fix it up is I gave it a shave, because the We Are Knitters Petite wool is very loosely spun. It's just like I think a single ply, very thick yarn, which I think means that it's very prone to pilling. And so when I pulled this out of storage the other day, I was like, oh yeah, this has seen better days. There were just giant pills hanging off of it. I mean, even now, like I'm looking at it and it's not devoid of pilling, despite the fact that I just spent 20 minutes going at it with a safety razor to shave off as much as I could. So I guess that's just something to be aware of with this yarn, is it's not going to be a non-pilling yarn. I am curious to see though if it pills less now that it's sort of done like an initial shed. I'll pop up a picture of like just how much material I shaved off of this thing. But so a lot of that were these really giant pills. Some of them are sort of like long and stringy and like go like multiple inches down the arm, you know? So there's a little bit of pilling going on still for sure, but they're much more minor. They're things. Actually, a lot of these are just plucking right off, like they're not even attached anymore. So like the shaving released them, but didn't remove them, if you will. So I think that this one can get even better still, but for now it is much better than it started. So that's gonna be nice to wear it this season, knowing that it's just looking a little less worse for wear. And on the one hand, I'm like, man, I really should have done that sooner because it's looked in that state for a good while. But on the other hand, it took me 20 minutes, which I mean, is 20 minutes a lot of time objectively? No, but when I have free time, is what I wish to be doing with, you know, this one wild and precious life taking a safety razor to a sweater? No, like that's just not really top of my list of fun things to do. so I hadn't gotten there yet, but I am pleased that it is now done. So if you've got some things that could use a shave, but you've been putting it off, maybe that's a good start on Fix It Fall. The real thing though that got me thinking about these Fix It projects being good options to work on as sort of like more mindless projects during my cabled project though, is my dad's socks, because these will be ones that have minimal setup and then just keep me busy for a few hours. So if you've been here for a while, you will know that I've knit my dad a few different pairs of socks. My dad loves a pair of pure wool socks to absolute death, and he's been so thrilled every time I made him some. The one thing we've learned the hard way though is that with a pure wool sock, there's going to be a tendency for the foot to felt just from the friction of being inside, especially a boot if you're wearing these in the winter, being very insulated, getting very hot, lots of friction. So felting is bound to occur, and when that happens, the foot of the sock ends up shrinking, and to make up for it, the leg ends up coming down to kind of become part of the foot. Like if I look closely at dad's sock, I can see this is where the actual like heel area was, and this is where it is now. So it has stolen this much of the leg to turn it into the foot. The result of that being that the leg is just not as long as we would like it to be. It's kind of an ankle sock now, which, you know, ankle socks have their time and place, but dad likes snowmobiling in the winter is not really it. And this is a problem that I had asked about on my channel when we were first running into it, being like, okay, I know people have been knitting wool socks for like centuries. So what am I supposed to be doing? Am I supposed to be doing something differently? Is it a fit issue? What's going on? And a lot of people were just saying, well, like, this is why sock yarn has nylon in it. And like, I hear you. And this makes sense. I know this is a common pattern that I've seen over and over. Sock yarns tend to have nylon in them. I just feel like there is something so nice about a pair of pure wool socks. And like, again, people have been doing this forever. So I was like, there must be a way that people have been accounting for this. So I did hear from a few people who have also been dedicated to the idea of 100% wool socks. And the advice that I got basically amounted to, this is 100% a thing, this is 100% a problem, and to compensate for it, you do just want to knit the foot of the sock longer than you think you need to. So when the socks are first worn, they are going to be a little bit extra big, they are going to be roomy, but it means that as they get worn in, as they get felted, they will stay more or less the right size without stealing the entire leg of your sock. So if you're looking to knit wool socks from scratch, that is what I would recommend. But here we have a pair of socks that already exists. So what I'm actually planning to do is just pick up around the top cuff of these and knit more leg. Now, there will be a little bit of a jog when I do that because all the socks that I've ever knit for dad have been cuffed down. That's going to be a change in the direction of the knitting. But at the same time, like, this is a pretty rustic wool. It's got some fuzz going on. Like, I don't think that that's going to be super visible. And I also asked dad, I was like, do you care if the leg has like something a little bit funky going on, or do you want these to be as long as you want them to be and you don't really care? And he was like, yeah, no, I'm not that picky. I would just love them to be longer. So that's great news. Love to hear that. I'm not gonna try to do anything wild to try to make this work in another way. And I'm just gonna pick up stitches around the ankle and knit. And I think in both cases, I have extra yarn from these projects, so that's no problem. And I will just add a few inches and then bind them off again. And this is something that I have been, again, putting off for a while. I think that dad gave these to me kind of at the tail end of the winter or early spring, kind of, you know, in the off season of his socks so that I could work on them while he didn't need them. And I mean, it's now October. I feel like he's gonna want these back soon. I've done absolutely nothing. And I think it's time to fix that so that he doesn't regret giving them back to me and not having them this winter. So these are one of the items on my to-do list for Fix It Fall. And I think these are gonna be really great because once I've done that initial stitch pickup, that's just gonna be like a few hours of like relatively mindless knitting. So excellent to have in between working on the cable projects. Next up on my Fix It Fall list, I have more socks, but these ones are a different problem. So I feel like socks just come with a lot of problems. I don't know, I'm not a huge sock knitter. I prefer like sweaters and tops. And the few socks that I have made, every single one of them has now had some kind of problem I've had to fix. So I don't know, it's not a good sell on socks, you guys. But I also realize that a lot of this is self-inflicted because like dad socks, these socks that I'm having problems with are also 100% wool socks. And I think that the problem I'm having with these are also problems that would be solved by using socks with a nylon blend. But here we are. So the first year that I was knitting, so this was a couple years ago now, I knit myself this pair of wool socks using leftover yarn from this sweater. You can see they match very well. So these are also made out of the We Are Knitters Petite Wool. These are, I believe, the Sunday Monday socks by Sari Nordland, but these are a little bit of a funky version because Since I was using leftover wool, this is a bulky weight yarn, which is not what the pattern is written for. So I had to do some modifications to remove repeats and things like that. So I will link to my Ravelry project, which has all my notes and stuff in it in case you're looking to do something similar. But I absolutely love these. I got a ton of wear out of these, but I got enough wear out of them that there's now a giant hole in them. Not ideal. And then at the very tail end of last year, I knit myself what I call my reading socks, styled after the big cozy slipper socks that are sold by Indigo here in Canada. I don't honestly remember the name of this pattern, but I will also pop it up and link it below. So I made these over Christmas last year, and I basically wore these because they're really intended to be like slippers. I wore these basically nonstop for the first several months of this year. And I mean, as a result, there's now a hole in them as well, which I was hoping to avoid because when I made these, I had already had the hole come up in these socks. So I was thinking preventatively, what if I put some like little sock stop on the bottoms? It would help both for grippiness, but I was also hoping that it would help just kind of keep the knit of the sock off of the ground, and it would be those like little rubbery bits touching the ground instead. And I suspect that it did help. I also think that now I would be able to do a better job of putting on that sock stop because I wasn't really sure kind of how much to like press it in. So there were some where the sock stop, once it dried, it was clearly just kind of sitting on the very surface of like the top fuzz layer of the yarn and wasn't actually making contact with like the real surface of the fabric. So those ones came off like almost immediately. So if the entire surface had been properly sock stopped, maybe it would have had more longevity. It's hard to say. But regardless, we now have 2 pairs of socks that both have holes in them. So what this means is that it is time for me to learn how to darn. I don't know how to do that, but I know that there are like a million YouTube tutorials. I've seen little Instagram reels. Like I've seen enough to know that it's not difficult, it's not complicated. I just need to like take half an hour, find a YouTube tutorial that seems promising and just get it done. And then also when I'm done the fix on the reading socks, I will do a fresh application of sock stop as well to hopefully get these a little more longevity, and maybe I'll try adding it on these too. I don't know, we'll see. But so as you can see, we have a pretty long list going of things to fix this year. Like I fixed this sweater already, but we have Dad's first pair of socks, Dad's second pair of socks, my pink and yellow socks, my reading socks, and we're actually not done. So I was obviously overdue to do some fixing. Hence, hashtag #FixItFallKAL. Please join me, I need help, I need company. The next thing on my Fix It Fall list is my dog walking gloves. So it's not that anything has gone wrong with these, it's just that when I told you these were done on my channel earlier this year, I might have like fudged ever so slightly in that I had not yet sewn on all of the snaps. I had sewn on one of the snaps that I could demonstrate it on the channel, and it just happened with like when I had time to film that week and whatever, I hadn't had time to sew them all on yet. And I was like, it does not make sense to me to put off showing this as a finished object until the next video. Like it's so close to, it looks done, it's like functionally done. However, I should have known that the second that I talked about that being done on the channel, I lost all interest in actually finishing it. Also because just by the time I finished these are obviously a cold weather project, and it wasn't cold weather anymore. So I didn't have incentive to finish them for real life. I didn't have incentive to finish them for the channel. So these have just been sitting there. And again, now it's October. And the day that I want to wear these could be literally any day now. And it only has one snap where it's supposed to be. I say where it's supposed to be because I attempted to sew the second one and realized that I actually put it like in the wrong place. I grabbed the wrong glove. I grabbed one thinking it was the other and sewed it on thinking it was sewed on to one that currently did not have a snap. And then once I was done, realized I had actually accidentally just sewn the 2 snaps on one glove and like pretty close together, just far enough that I hadn't seen the other one when I was working on it. But then in practicality, it's like one snap would be like here and one snap would be like here. I don't know. Which also, why was one ever here? Like I don't really understand what was going on and how I ended up putting one like on the side of a hand, because that's not ever where I would have been trying to make a snap. As you can see, the snap adhesion was not as straightforward as I would have liked. I was obviously not having a great time, and I think that after I realized this mistake, I was like, okay, I hated sewing that on in the first place, and now I have to like undo that one and do it again. And I just like put it in timeout, and I haven't taken it out yet. but I need to, because I put so much thought earlier this year into how to design a weird pair of gloves that would work for exactly what I wanted it to while I was out walking copper this winter. And I think for the first bit of the cold weather, having just the fingerless portion will suffice. But I don't know, the last few years, like shout out thanks global warming, we haven't been having much of a transition. We've been going pretty abruptly from summer into winter with very little in between. So I think very soon I am gonna want that extra little finger cover component, and I need the snaps on there in order for that to work properly. So I gotta get to it. Hashtag fix a Fall KAL. Okay, we're finally at the last thing that I'm intending to fix this fall. This didn't really feel like that monumental of a task until I sat down here to talk about all of them, and now I'm like out of breath just trying to talk through all these things, and we haven't even gotten into finished object or whips. So apparently I have a lot to fix this fall. So the last thing on my list to go back and fix is to take out all of my knit garments and to add on little tags. Because I imagine that if you've knit yourself garments, you're familiar with this problem. A lot of sweaters do have short row shaping for the back, but it's not making a dramatic difference. It makes enough of a difference that when it's on your body, you can feel if it's on the right way or not. But it's not enough difference that when you hold up the garment, you can easily tell. And the result of this, at least for me, is that every time I go to get dressed, I hold it up, I try to figure out like, okay, yeah, I think the neck is sitting like higher or lower this way or that way, or okay, yeah, like line up the bottom hems, how does it sit? And somehow, despite these efforts, 75% of the time I put on a sweater and I go, ugh, it's on backwards. So I thought, wouldn't it be nice to just have a little tag in the back of my garment so I know that it's the back? And more than that, wouldn't it be really, really cute if it was like a custom tag that said that I made it, and it would just feel really like cute and polished and like special. And this was a good idea. This was such a good idea that like more than a year ago, I had these made and I have not been using them. I put one in my Barnes sweater when I finished that one, but I apparently did not do a good job because it has since like come out, like one by one the stitches came out. And in that case, I was trying to do it very unobtrusively and honestly just like low effortly. So I had just done like kind of a stitch in each of the four corners, and yeah, one by one those came out. So that no longer has its tag in it. And you know what? I have found it much harder to get dressed in that sweater since the tag came out. But it's also the only one that I ever got around to doing that on, because I just don't like doing these sort of fiddly sewy I'm not a sewist, I am a knitter. I don't like these parts, but I do recognize that they really improve my experience with my knits. So again, we just gotta suck it up, we gotta fix it fall. And you know what, let me show you the tag, because I think maybe looking at them and thinking about them being cute will also help motivate me. So I have a couple different versions, and they look like this. So handmade by me. And then this one says hand wash cold and dry flat. So this would be for like 100% wool, non-superwash garment. Actually right behind me, this is Bean. This is Copper's buddy. She's with us today. So this would be for a wool non-superwash garment. And I also have this version that says machine wash cold and tumble dry low. So that would be for like a superwash wool or something else that's suitable to go in the wash. And then lastly, I also had little tiny ones made up that look like this that are intended to go on socks or other small accessories. So it would fold over the edge like this. So we just have the little A on the one side, and then here, wash cold and air dry. And these are on this nice like cotton twill sort of fabric. So they feel really nice and high quality. They feel like a real tag. And this envelope is a little worse for wear now because it's just been like kicking around in my knitting basket with like a spool of thread inside. So it's being stretched. But I got these from Ever Emblem on Etsy. So I just provided them with my design and then they had them printed for me. But I think that they also had like existing templates you can use. And then they sent me, in this case, an uncut sheet of all the labels. So I got the uncut cotton labels and then just cut them out myself because I have like real paper cutters from like scrapbooking and stuff. So I can do that really cleanly, really easily, and that saves you some money. But they will also pre-cut your labels for you if you want to pay for that as well. And so this is completely non-sponsored. I just genuinely am like really happy with the product, but I will leave a link in the description below in case you're interested in getting some for yourself. But yeah, so I've got a bunch of these labels and a bunch of sweaters that they need to go in, and they're currently in none of them, and I would like to fix that. Now, because I was not enjoying sewing those in by hand, I started looking. I was like, is there a way that I can do this? And now, okay, sewing machine. Could I use a sewing machine? In theory, yes. I do actually currently have possession of a sewing machine. I have my mom's sewing machine right now because I was kind of curious. After getting into knitting, I was thinking, oh, would I enjoy getting into sewing? I tried a project last year. I made a wool plaid skirt out of like an old wool blanket that I bought secondhand, and I'm happy with how it turned out, but I can't say that I enjoyed the process in the same way that I enjoy knitting. It's just not like mindless in the same way. You know, knitting has a much higher like mindless to involved ratio than sewing does. Like sewing is so much setup. It's like mostly the fiddly bits of knitting that I don't like. So really I just need to give mom her sewing machine back. But before I do that, I could use that to sew in these labels. That said, I am a bit nervous about going at my knits with a sewing machine. It just feels like it could get out of control so easily. But then again, in theory, I could, instead of using the foot pedal, like I could just do it really slowly by like manually cranking the sewing machine so I have very direct control over each stitch. That might make sense. But before that idea occurred to me, I did find online this little contraption I'm gonna show you. Now, it basically looks like a stapler. It's actually a little handheld sewing machine. So you can see the thread, and when you press it down, you can see the needle goes in and whatever. So in theory, it's basically doing the same thing as a regular sewing machine, but you are like hand cranking each stitch in a way that to me would be much sort of lower lift, like you could just sit on the couch and do this. Once I understand how to use it, I'm hoping will be very simple, and that I will be very happy that I bought it. However, continuing the theme of this knit along, I've been putting this off forever because I got this months ago. And I don't want to give the information for this just yet because I do not know if I could even remotely endorse this thing. Like, I got very attached to this idea once I discovered that this existed, but the place that I ordered it from did not really inspire like a lot of confidence in me as far as like the quality of what I was going to receive. It just felt like definitely one of my sketchier online purchases, and I just don't really want to be like pointing you over to something that, as far as I know at this point, could be entirely garbage. So let me test it out. Let me report back. If it works well, I'll let you know. But for now, I have no idea if this is useful or if it's just junk, honestly. Okay, I feel like that was a lot of stuff, but those are my plans for Fix It Fall. So we'll see if I can get through all of that. Hopefully, I don't know. That feels like a lot of things. I think that the main priority for me are dad's socks so I can get those back to him, and then darning my own socks because I've really been missing having those socks, honestly. Like so many times I've wanted to put them on and been like, oh yeah, I can't wear them. Oh yeah, they have a giant hole in them. So I would really like to get those done. Then again, I also really need to get the snaps sewn on the dog walking glove. All of these things need to get done. Everything is a priority. Love that for me. Anyway, so those are my plans for Fix It Fall, but I want to know what yours are. Please, again, use hashtag FixItFall, KAL, either in the YouTube comments here or if you want to post on Instagram. Tell me what you want to fix. Tell me what you've already fixed. Show me before and afters if you've got them. I want to see what you're doing. I'll keep you posted on how my fixes are going too, and hopefully we can just kind of hold each other accountable and actually get these things done that we've been putting off for, in many cases, quite a while. So good luck to all of us. Okay, so with all our fixes out of the way, we can actually now get into the first finished object of the fall knitting plan season. So if you saw my fall knitting plans, you'll remember that one of the things that I wanted to do this fall is knit up Mom's scarf. So Mom, if you are watching this, you have to leave. I know that you love to spoil your own presents. I know that you were the first one to go under the Christmas tree and shake everything under it, but this is a bridge too far. You cannot. I'm sorry, I love you, you must go. So the backstory to this is that she was with me in Venice in a little yarn store, and she kept circling back to this one yarn that looked like this, and she kept being like, wow, I feel like this would make a really cute sort of like funky accessory scarf, and she just kept circling back with this thought. And I was like, okay, so what I'm hearing is that you would like me to make you a cute accessory scarf out of this. So I bought that yarn from Lella in Venice. I think it cost about $30 Canadian, and this yarn is Alp Premier in the color 420. Now, as you can see, this is a wild yarn. There's a lot of things going on. That was very clear from the skein. And let me tell you, it was a wild yarn to try to wind up. So I tried using my Swift and ball winder here. I untwisted the skein. I had it all stretched out on the Swift, and I was trying to wind it through the ball winder, and just there's so many different things going on, and some parts of it are so thick and some are thin, and all of these parts are just attached by just knots. Like they're just all knotted together. And these thick parts and the knots just kept getting caught in the little feeder that kind of keeps the tension right as the yarn goes into the ball winder. And it was just an absolute nightmare. Like even the parts that were eventually going through were a pain to get them there. And then I hit a part where I just could not get it to go through. And then I couldn't fix that without unwinding from one of the ends. And both ends were like, one is in a ball winder, one's on a Swit. Like it was terrible. So I ended up unwinding the part that had already been wound onto the ball winder and then just doing it by hand and just manually winding it into a ball rather than a cake from the ball winder, because it was just completely impossible to wind. So I was like, okay, this is going to be an interesting project. So once I had it wound up, I knew I kind of needed to do some swatching because this was one where I wasn't planning to follow any particular pattern. Like, it's such a kind of distinct yarn that I was like, I don't know how to even find a pattern that's designed for this kind of yarn. Like, it's just so particular. So I was thinking, okay, I think the best thing that I can do with this, because there's so many thicks and thins, is just knit a scarf that's very like open gauge so that there aren't parts that look really dense and like a solid fabric and other parts that don't. Like, it should just all look open, right? So that it looks intentionally open. So all I did was cast on, I think, like 30 stitches onto my biggest needles, 10mm needles. And I just knit like maybe an inch or two of that, not very much, but just kind of enough to figure out, okay, roughly how many stitches equals how many inches. So once I had that figured out, I just cast on enough stitches to measure 6 feet. I was thinking if this scarf is 6 feet long, that's kind of a good amount of length to be able to like wrap it around and kind of have some nice drapey ends and whatever. So from there, I was just knitting flat across my stitches, and then at the end of every row, I was doing a decrease at each side to give it a tapered edge. Okay, are we ready to see the scarf? I think we can tell from the skein that this is a wild yarn with a lot of stuff going on that's going to create a very like funky, like Miss Frizzly, artsy sort of vibe, and it sure is. It sure delivers. So here is the finished scarf. You can see there's like a million different textures going on. Here you can see the tapered ends. Can you see that? There we go. There you can see the tapered ends. So the whole thing, did it actually end up being 6 feet long? Let's see. I think so. It's wider than my wingspan. I'm 5'8", so it might actually be slightly longer than 6 feet all told, but so here you can see all the different stuff going on. If I get close up, like some of these are ribbons, some of them is like confetti yarn, some is like relatively normal yarn, but it like changes color as it goes along. Some of it, this one with like the little orange and peach and then dark bits, that was a pain in the butt because it's like the strand has holes in it. It's like the dark bits are like holding, can you just focus? The dark bits are like holding the fuzzy bits in place, so there's holes in it. So when you go to stick your needle in, like it kept ending up in the wrong place like every time I put the needle in. So that part was really exciting. It was both kind of a pain in the butt to knit for that reason, because there were just so many different textures and it was just very easy to accidentally put your needle in the wrong place. But it was also such a quick knit. So here, let me put this on while we talk. So let's see, we'll do a little okay, it like kind of clashes with what I'm wearing, but so I decided to bring this when I was recently going on a trip out to Canmore, Alberta to visit some of my friends. If you saw my last episode in my Off the Needle segment, I was talking about scrapbooking a trip from last year to Mexico to go see my 3 best friends from high school, who we all live kind of scattered across the country now. So I just got back from a trip this year to go visit them in Canmore, Alberta, because that is where one of our friends, Amy, lives. And it's an absolutely gorgeous place. It's this tiny little mountain town, and just everywhere you go is just mountains, just everything is like stunningly beautiful. It's right outside Banff National Park. It's like the closest you can live to Banff National Park, because you can only live inside Banff National Park if you work there. But all that to say, I was going on this trip and I wanted to bring knitting with me, but I was also packing very tight because I was packing for colder weather than home, because being a mountain town, it was already colder there than it is at home. I was packing carry-on only on the kind of budget airline that checks everything, including like your personal items. So even my backpack I brought on the plane couldn't be very big, could not even be like normal full, let alone overstuffed. So I had to be very careful what I was bringing with me. And I thought, you know what, I feel like this would be a good project to bring because it's so mindless. Like, I'm just going to be knitting flat. Oh, and actually I meant to mention, I was actually knitting this in garter stitch. So despite the fact that I was knitting it flat, I was just doing knit stitches every single time, no purling. So I was like, this will be a great sort of mindless knit that I can work on the flight while I'm hanging out with Brooke, who I'm traveling with over to Alberta, while we're just hanging out at Amy's chatting. It'll be a great project to bring. I really underestimated how quickly this was going to come together, because this trip was sort of a long weekend. You know, we got in Friday afternoon and then we were leaving Tuesday morning. I ran out of knitting to do Sunday night. And like, this is not a trip where we were just sitting around knitting all day. You know, we went and we climbed a mountain. We were exploring downtown. We were doing other things. But this just came together so quickly that I fully ran out of knitting and like had nothing to work on the way home. But it was also really funny sitting around and knitting on this while my friends were around, because they hadn't seen the yarn in its skein form where you can sort of see a lot of the different things going on. They were only seeing the ball that I was knitting out of. And the main difference between those experiences of the yarn, if you will, is that the ball really kind of hides what's coming next, because everything on the top layer is all these sort of most upcoming yarn, whereas when the yarn is twisted into a hank, you can kind of see all these different parts of it, right? So watching me knit from the ball, they were really getting this experience through like I was a magician, like pulling all the different handkerchiefs out of my sleeve. So as I'm, you know, working from this ball, they're just like, oh my God, like what strange yarn is about to appear? Like at one point you get to this like tinselly fuzzy, they're just like, what is going on? You never knew what was coming next. There's definitely a bit of appeal in continuing to knit just to be like, what is this yarn about to give me? Now, in addition to the weird part of just like it being hard sometimes to get the needle in the right place just because there's such different gauges and yarn densities going on, another downside to this yarn was the amount of little bits that it shed. So just like little pieces of the confetti yarn were coming off. A couple of the yarn strands in here have glitter on them. You know, my apologies to Amy for any remnants of this scarf left behind in her house. I definitely was kind of like plucking little bits off my pants as I was working on it. So it's not for the faint of heart in that regard, I would say. And then let me see if I can find, I mentioned that, oh no, don't choke yourself. I mentioned that the different strands are just attached with knots, which I mean, I guess it makes sense. Like I don't think you can like spit splice ribbon, for example. But so there are just little like knots that you can kind of see here. I couldn't really come up with a better thing to do with that. So I just kind of did my best to tighten them and then cut the ends of the knots really short. And then I'm just kind of hoping that just in all the busyness of everything going on that you just don't like see them. I did also have to go back when I was finished and kind of weave some leftover yarn through a few gaps that appeared, again, because it was very easy to accidentally catch the wrong loop in all of the weird yarns going on. There were some holes. So when I was done, I did go back and just like weave little bits of yarn in to kind of cover those up, which I think worked out pretty well. I can't really tell where that happened. Again, I think this the busyness of the yarn does a lot to camouflage things like that, so that's nice. You can see actually the bind off edge is here at the top, this red. So this is the width of it by the time I got to the end. So because I was doing decreases every row, this is the width that it got down to by the time I ran out of yarn. So each end has an extra this much. That is what was kind of tapered down to create that tapered edge like that. So that's it. This is Mom's scarf that took me all of like 2.5 days to knit, and hopefully she likes it. I think that I don't know, it's always hard to know from what a skein looks like when it's twisted up in a hank to how it will actually knit up. So I really have no idea, is this what she imagined it would look like? Is it close? Is it completely different? Will she hate it? I don't know. I hope she likes it. I hope that it is every funky little artsy vibe that she was hoping for. And I'll report back after Christmas. Okay, it's WIPs time. So last time I showed you the beginnings of my Christmas stockings by Claire Slade. And I chose not to take these to Canmore with me because they are giant, right? The wool is bulky, the stockings are bulky. This was just not a very viable travel project, but I was excited to get back to them when I got home. So this is a free pattern. There's no relevant sizing. It's just a home decor item. It's not supposed to actually fit anybody's actual foot. And I'm knitting this out of Bernat Fluffy, which I got from Michael's, regular price $15, and I got it for $10 with a coupon. But I also paid for it using a gift card from a return of something I bought forever ago. So really this felt free. This was money that has not been in my budget for eons. Now this pattern calls for a size 5.5mm needle, but as always, I'm sizing up my needles to a 6mm because I knit tight, and that's what was getting me the right gauge. So these are constructed cuff down in the round, and I'm actually knitting these, I will show you, 2 at a time, but on separate needles. Now, this one needs to get back on its needles because I actually had to steal the cord for when I was doing this neckband because it's a very similar circumference, so I needed to borrow that. But once I get that back on, this will be ready to pick back up because I'm knitting these 2 at a time on separate circulars in a way where I'm kind of knitting one section of the instructions on one and then the other, and then the next section on one and then the other. And I believe that it's actually time for me to start the heel on this one, which means that it's time for me to go back and do the leg on this one, and then I will do the heels on both of them together. So this is our one that is obviously much further along. This is the folded cuff of the stocking. Here is some beautiful cabling. So I was talking in the last episode about having done a swatch of the cable pattern. I hadn't actually gotten to any of the cabling on the actual stocking yet, and feeling very intimidated by the cable pattern because while it is beautiful by virtue of being very complex. So this is an 8-row cabling repeat in which 3 of those 8 rows have you doing cabling, and there are 3 different styles of cables, 2 of which you also have a front and back variation of each one. So there's just a lot of different stuff going on, and I was like, is this going to be a total nightmare? I was getting stressed. So I decided before I actually started the leg of the actual stocking to make a little cheat sheet. And actually, since this is a free pattern, I can just show you. So I made this little page that I laminated using packing tape. So I have my 8-row cable pattern here. I grayed out the 2 rows where you're just repeating row 1. So in the actual instructions, it says repeat row 1, but I don't love that in written patterns when I am trying to kind of line by line keep track of where I am, because if you're on row 7, but you have to reference row 1 and then you're looking at row 1, it's like, well, wait a minute, am I actually on row 1 or am I on row, like which row am I on? I feel like it's very easy to lose track. So instead of just saying repeat row 1, I just copied out row 1 again, but grayed it out just as a reminder of like, you know this one, you don't have to worry about doing something different, like this is the same as usual. So I grayed out rows 7 and 8 for that reason. And then I also bolded all of the actual cabling so I could see from a glance when I'm starting a row, is this a cabled row or is this not a cabled row, and where exactly does that happen? Now, you can see in looking at this, each row, there's a lot, like, it's not like a knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, suddenly you're doing a cable. Like, look at this. Knit 1, purl 2, knit 8, purl 1, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 1, knit 8. Like, it's just, initially I was like, oh my God, like this, I will never be able to memorize this. This is awful. I also at the side included the instructions for the cable 3 front and the cable 3 back, because this pattern also includes a cable 8 front and back and a cable 4 back, but those were very easy for me to remember very quickly because it's just 4 to the front, 4 to the back. But because the 3-stitch cables are using an odd number, it's more complicated to remember, like in the front versus the back, which one am I doing with 1 stitch versus 2 stitches. And also the 3-stitch cable includes a purl stitch, which the 8 and the 4-stitch cables are all just knit stitches. So these are the ones where I was like, what on earth? Like, I am not gonna be able to remember how to do these. So I included those on my cheat sheet. And now I'm pleased to report that this cheat sheet has been very helpful. And also the pattern has become much easier to work on than it felt like it was going to be at first. And a big part of the reason for that is that I've realized that all of the rows where you're not doing cabling is just knitting the stitches as they appear. So if you are able to read your knitting, you are able to knit those rows without looking at the instructions and without memorizing what goes where. As long as you can just look at it and be like, okay, yep, this stitch is already knitted, this stitch is already purled, and I will just do that same thing on this row, you're good to go. The only reason that there are rows that are written out like this that didn't in the original pattern just say same as row 1 is because what you're doing does change because of the cabling. The 3-stitch cable does rearrange some of your knits and your purls. So for example, rows 3 and 5 are not the same as row 1, but they are the same in that you just knit the stitches as they appear. They just appear differently because of the cabling that's happened in between. But so what that functionally means is that while I'm knitting, I only actually have to look at the instructions for the rows that involve cabling. And even now, I have started to wrap my head around the 3-stitch cables. It took a while, it did take several repeats, and even still I find myself double checking my cheat sheet a lot, and this is where I'm very glad to have it, because if every time I wanted to double check, I had to like open it up on my phone, I think that would feel much more cumbersome. But I feel like I've really gotten the hang of those cables now, so that's less obtrusive. It'll be easier to do the second leg that way. And yeah, the rest of it is really no problem. But I have found this very helpful along the way. And I still find it helpful just to be able to keep track of which row I am on, because with the complexity of this, like I'm sure that I could, if I had to, figure out which row I'm on, but I think that it would just be much more confusing than I need to deal with. And I also think that it would be easy to accidentally end up one row off, because sometimes when a row is still the row that's on your needles, it just looks a bit different. It's just kind of harder to read than once it's like a few rows down from what's live on your needles. So I've been using this handy paper clip here just to track where I am and moving that up and down as I get through the different rows. That back on row 7 where I was. So I highly recommend the cheat sheet strategy if you have a pattern where you're having a similar issue, or if you just keep pulling up a pattern just to look at the one tiny section that has your pattern repeat on it. I highly recommend just printing or writing it out on a tiny piece of paper. I wrapped mine in tape for a little bit more longevity so it didn't get too beat up, but whatever works. And this fits into my project bag super duper easily. And it's just kind of been a lifesaver on this project. So I cast these on September 26th, and this is as far as the leg is supposed to go on this one. The heel is supposed to start next. I'm kind of wondering if I should do a mid-project block on this just to get a sense of whether it's going to grow, how much it's going to grow. And it's funny because when I started the cuff, I was like, okay, great, this looks really nice and big. You know, it's going to be a Christmas stocking. You want it to be nice and big so it fits things. Like, you don't want it to look just like a normal sock size, right? And I was feeling like the cuff seemed like a really great size and like that was going to be really perfect. But I'm starting to get a little bit worried about the width of the leg. Like, the cables have really tightened this in. But I do know that cables do tend to loosen up in blocking. But I also don't know that it's going to loosen up as much as the cuff. I feel like as I show this, these holes are really standing out. That's on the fold line of the ribbed cuff. There are these little yarn overs that the pattern tells you to do. And I'm starting to wonder if I should have ignored that. I don't know. Oh, there's all these little hairs in this. I don't know if it's just intended to help it like stay folded at the right point. Like, when it's folded exactly the right way, so it's right on the top edge, you can't really see it. So maybe that's not a problem. Maybe there's a step at the end where you sort of like sew the cuff folded using those holes, and I just haven't looked that far. I don't know. Right now I'm just not entirely sold on those, but I'm just gonna trust the process and that that's gonna work out well. But yeah, so I'm hoping that this leg kind of loosens up. I'm also trying to decide, do I feel like that's long enough if I start the foot right now? Do I want to do more repeats, but do I have enough yarn to do more repeats? I don't know. According to the pattern yardage and the yardage on this ball that I bought, it should be, this one giant ball, should be enough to do both stockings. This is only half. I separated the yarn ball into one for each one. But, you know, I'm not using the exact same yarn from the pattern. It's the right weight. It's getting me gauge, but it's always possible that with different yarns, you kind of end up using different yardage just depending on exactly how much of its length kind of gets used up in like wrapping around itself in the creation of the different stitches. So it's possible that this yarn isn't going to go quite as far as the one that the pattern used. So I'm getting a little bit worried about running out of yarn. I don't think that I feel very comfortable just like adding a bunch of lengths to the leg just because I feel like it. So maybe I really do need to do a mid-project block on this just to see how I feel like the overall size of this is working out before I get too far on the second one. Maybe that would be a smart thing to do. Now, I will say there's one part of this that is bugging me, which is that I made a mistake, and I think I went back and tried to fix it, but it didn't work. And that is this one spot on this cable. Can you see this cable just doesn't look quite like the others? It's just not twisting as well. Like this spot is supposed to be more kind of like down in there. So this cable is supposed to look tighter. I don't know. I feel like it's harder to see on camera than it is in person. Maybe that also means when it's hung up on the wall, it'll be harder to see and I won't notice as much, but it's just supposed to kind of be like a little more like that. And it's more, I don't know. So what I'm wondering is if I think that the first time when I actually knit the row, I think I accidentally omitted the cabling and then went back down, like ladder down to try to fix it. And I think I might have done it one row off. Like I think that it might cable a tiny bit higher up than it's supposed to, and the cabling is supposed to be like there, and that would have pinched it in the right spot. I think that might be what's happening. This is part of why I don't like trying to mentally keep track of what row I'm on a cabling pattern, because like I tried to go back and sort of figure out which is the row where I'm supposed to do the cable swap while I'm laddered down, and I think that I got it wrong by one. So fixing cabling, not ideal. But the worst part is that whatever I did here, I did the exact same thing on the other side. So I can't even just be like, oh, this will just be the side that hangs against the wall and I'll show this side. No, because they have the exact same problem. So I don't know. I think I'm just gonna have to make peace with that, because I think that if I try to ladder back and fix it, there's just a higher risk that I mess up more things in the amount of repeats that have happened since I noticed this. So I just feel like the odds of making it worse instead of better are just too high. I'm just gonna have to be okay with it. I might try to see if I can sort of use just like an extra piece of yarn to just sort of like from the inside, like grab one of these stitches, just kind of putting in just a little like stitch that kind of like pulls it more toward the back, just to see if I can get it to look a little tighter and like that cable goes in more in the middle. That might be a terrible idea. It might not work at all, but if it doesn't work at all, I'll just pull a stitch out. I'm thinking that's worth a shot, and failing that, we just have to not be obsessive about this. We just have to be okay with it. All right, that's all I've got for you today on the knitting front. And we're gonna do just like a really kind of quick speed round of Off the Needles today where I talk about non-knitting things, because I mean, first of all, I feel like I've just exhausted myself talking about all the things that I want to fix this fall. And also, I just don't have a lot to report on this front because I was on kind of a funky recording schedule last week. It actually hasn't been very long since I last recorded, so I don't have a lot of updates. And I also am still kind of in a reading slump. So if you have advice in getting over a reading slump, please let me know. Please give me your tips, because I would love to be back into reading. And I just, the last few weeks have been having a hard time. I swapped which book I was reading. It didn't make a difference. So I just, please help. But I can show you the book I'm currently reading is The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. I am about halfway through, and despite the fact that I'm in a reading slump, I am really enjoying this book. Like when I am reading it, I am enjoying it. I'm just finding myself not in a reading mindset. Like I'm just not feeling like, you know what I would love to do right now? Read. So I'm getting through this much slower than I usually do a Casey McQuiston book, but not because I'm enjoying it any less. It's such a fun, just like silly out there premise of two exes like accidentally ending up on this trip together that they were supposed to take together years ago, and then there was a cancellation, and so they had this voucher and had to use it by a certain date, and well, wouldn't you know, they both decided to use this voucher at the same time, and oh well, maybe they'll get back together. It's just, it's fun, it's cute, it's silly, it's a great time. And I just feel like I'm just not like savoring it the way that I would like to be, because reading is just not going great for me right now. So wish me luck on that. Give me advice if you have it, please. All right, so that's everything I have for you today. So if you'd like to join me for Fix It Fall, please don't forget to use hashtag FixItFall, KAL, on Instagram or in the YouTube comments. And if you're posting on Instagram, please also tag me at Allison Rowan. And if you'd like to be here next time, please consider subscribing if you aren't already. If you are, you're my favorite, and I'll see you next time. Bye.